What's up, everybody? Thanks for joining me on this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon edition of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'm Ryan Thomas, and what a night it was last night as I wrap up one of the articles that I will be posting on the myfantasysportstalk.com. I joined Jeremy and Bradley last night on the Bills Wire podcast. Was very thankful to join them on the show on the Bills Wire podcast, and we talked about a lot of interesting topics in regards to the Buffalo Bills. And you can check out that podcast on the Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. I posted the link as well on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Facebook page, my Twitter account, which is at Thomas Takeover, as well as I think I posted something about it on Instagram as well. So check it out. You guys will enjoy it for sure. And I wanted to hop on here today and talk about a topic that I don't think is being talked about enough, and that is the leadership of this current Buffalo Bills team. Who do I believe is the unquestioned leader of this franchise? And to some extent, my answer may shock you. To others, it may not. But when I look at the leader of this current team, it's a guy that is always in the know within the roster. He always knows where the team is at. He seems to have great wherewithal as far as where they're at offensively, where they're at defensively. And that guy, to me, is Lorenzo Alexander. Time and time again, I see interviews with Lorenzo Alexander, whether he's on Jim Rome, whether he's on the John Murphy Show, whether he's on WGR 550, whether he's on podcasts. This guy is the mainstay voice of this team. And as much as I love Kyle Williams, and Lord knows that I do, and I think he's a fantastic player, he's had a fantastic career, I think the real leader, the vocal leader, the voice of the team is Lorenzo Alexander. And while Lorenzo Alexander might not be on this team 5-10 years from now, he's that locker room voice that everybody can turn to and say, well, if I need advice from anybody, I can point to Lorenzo Alexander and say, hey, can you give me advice on this? Can you give me advice on that? And really what really impresses me about Lorenzo Alexander in terms of his leadership abilities is that he was the first guy to go out on a limb and say that Josh Allen had serious talent. Meanwhile, the fan base wasn't really fully believing in Josh Allen quite yet. And Lorenzo Alexander was that guy that said, hey, well, I believe in Josh Allen. We know he's got a little bit of ways to go, but we think that he has the right intangibles in being the future starting quarterback for this team. He's a guy that I really admire for that, because you could easily be a veteran in this league and kind of just worry about your own business, and many guys do. But Lorenzo Alexander is one of those guys that says, hey, if one of those guys out there in the media, or one of these players, Jalen Ramsey, is dogging one of my guys, is going after one of my guys, I'm going to defend one of my guys, whether this guy is on the offense, whether this guy is a special teamer, whether this guy is the backup long snapper. Lorenzo Alexander seems to be the guy that is always the vocal leader of this team. And it's been this way, I think, since he got here, which that was one of the Rex Ryan moves. So for all the bad moves and the tumultuous tenure that he had here in the 2 years that he was here, wouldn't say tumultuous, but let's say tumultuous light in terms of the tenure that he had when he was here, Lorenzo Alexander was one of the first moves that this team really made that really flew under the radar, and it turned out to be a great signing for a lot of reasons. As a guy that is not just a vocal leader within the organization and in terms of the Buffalo Bills, but a great community guy as well. To me, this man is the unquestioned leader of the Buffalo Bills in 2018, whether he is the best player on the Bills, whether he's the guy that everybody talks about in the headlines. He's not a guy that is talked about a lot. We talk about Josh Allen, we talk about LaShawn McCoy, we talk about Kelvin Benjamin, we talk about some of the quote-unquote sexier positions in the roster, but Lorenzo Alexander, largely, has spent the majority of his career, most of his prime has been played out, and I don't think he's past his prime by any stretch of the imagination, but just his ability to help guys like Tremaine Edmonds, his ability to help guys like Tanner Vallejo, his ability to help guys like Matt Milano, I think go a really long way, and his ability to really stick up for his teammates, to say, hey, this is wrong. Jalen Ramsey doesn't know Josh Allen. Jalen Ramsey does not practice with Josh Allen. Who is he to say these comments about Josh Allen? And you can check out that interview on the Jim Rome Show. I really admired that. Lorenzo Alexander's ability to just brush off the haters and really stick up for his teammate. I think that was huge. There's a lot of dynamics within leadership that I think people really overrate. And one of those dynamics is, yelling on the sideline. People lead in different ways. And I think, someone like Lorenzo Alexander is not going to be that guy that is going to get in people's faces and scream in their face and things like that. Lorenzo Alexander is going to be the guy that when one of his teammates makes a bad, quote-unquote, bad play or makes an error, he's that guy to kind of take the guy aside and say, hey, you could have done that a lot better, but this is what you need to do next time. And that doesn't pertain to just the defensive side of the ball. That pertains to offense as well. As we head into 2018, obviously, he's defending his quarterback, a guy that he's barely known. Really, you want to look at the reality of the situation. He's known Josh Allen for 4 months, and he had to really stand behind the Bills' decision here to go out and get him, and he was one of the first guys to do that, and I think that went a long way in terms of the immediate production and success that Josh Allen has seen in these first 2 weeks of the preseason action, and as he starts the third week of the preseason. So Lorenzo Alexander, to me, the unquestioned leader, and Kyle Williams, I'm hoping that Kyle Williams comes back. I'm hoping that he comes back healthy, ready, and willing to play, but right now there's a lot of curiosity as far as whether or not he will return. I think he will return, but it won't be anytime soon. It won't be, when we originally had thought. It won't be, this guy's going to be, out for the season. I think he will be. I don't think he will be out for the season. I think he will return, is what I'm trying to say. Meanwhile, you have, Harrison Phillips, Adolphus Washington, and something that I touched on last night, as did Bradley on the podcast last night on the Bills Wire, that Tremaine Edmonds has been really thrown into a huge situation as the middle linebacker of this team. He is quarterbacking that defense, and it's a very, very tough task to ask of Tremaine Edmonds to do this at this point in his career. Rookie, 20 years old, and Lorenzo Alexander has given Edmonds positive reinforcement, and that's something that I think is a real key in leadership. Positive reinforcement that despite the fact that and despite the fact that I know you're not doing as well maybe as you would like, we're going to work through it. And I'm going to prop you up and tell you your positive traits as a player that basically instill confidence in this young man that, yes, he can be that type of player. Yes, he can be one of the linchpin players on this team for many years to come, and I think he can. But when you have these initial struggles in your career, whether you're Josh Allen with a lot of the Josh Allen haters, or whether you're Tremaine Edmonds with adjusting to quarterbacking a defense in the National Football League, Lorenzo Alexander is going to be there for you either way. And I really appreciate that. I think a lot of fans really appreciate that. I don't think enough writers talk about that. I want to be a writer that talks about that, and touches base on that, because I think that's a topic that that definitely needs to be talked about more. Lorenzo Alexander is by far one of the best leaders, not just on the Buffalo Bills, but in the NFL. You see what he does for the community. You see what he does off the field. Family man, highly respectable individual. So big ups to Lorenzo Alexander for his leadership this offseason, this preseason, and obviously this regular season as we inch closer and closer to week 1 versus the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. Very excited for that game. I will have Stephanie Wilson on the show prior to that game, the Wednesday before opening kickoff for the Buffalo Bills. We're going to be talking about the preseason, what our thoughts are on the current state of the Bills, and some of the youth movement, Harrison Phillips, Tremaine Edmonds, and much, much more. And I'm very excited to have her on the show again. She was a great guest a couple months ago when she was on. Around draft time, she came on, and it's been a little bit too long. I wanted to get her on sooner, but everything's going really well with this podcast, and I really appreciate the love and support that I get from the listeners and from the viewers, whether I'm on visually on YouTube or whether I'm on audio streaming from Spreaker.com. I really appreciate all the support. Plenty more to come. Plenty more podcast appearances on my end as I join CJ DeSimone Sunday morning, this Sunday, August 26th, on the Jets Factor podcast to talk Buffalo Bills football. Very excited. Things are really onward and upward, moving on up in terms of the Thomas Take Sports podcast, and I definitely am excited for the future. This season is going to be great for my podcast, just as last season was. Views were through the roof. The post-game shows were fantastic, and I really can't wait to bring that back better than ever, bigger and better than ever before. 1 year later, season 2, so to speak, of those post-game shows, and that really put my podcast on the map in terms of the Facebook audience, in terms of the Twitter audience. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, guys. Love communicating with the Buffalo Bills fans, Buffalo Sabres fans, and MMA fans. I'm going to have Damon Martin on the show probably sometime next week as we're going to talk about the main headlines in mixed martial arts. Very excited to have him on. This is a great community in terms of the podcast community. Everybody is so supportive, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll be sure to post this on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Thomas Takeover as well. Follow me on Instagram at Thomas Take SP, which I think I might change my Twitter handle to that. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm so used to it being Thomas Takeover. I really enjoy it. So, and as I've said before, I was never here just to take part. I was here to take over. Anytime I'm on a show, I bring my big personality and really enjoy communicating with writers and being on other shows. If anybody's got a show out there that they want a guest, I'm your guy. Call me up, and we'll make it happen. Take care, everybody.